But then, you see, they've got it wrong before. Let's take the DDT example, where 40 years ago, Jackie Kennedy read Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring. And the thesis of this book was that because of DDT and other chemicals we were pouring into the atmosphere, the world was going to be so grossly polluted that every species other than humankind would die, and then eventually we would die too, and it was all going to be terrible. And Jackie Kennedy read this and shivered and plucked at the sleeve of her husband, who was then President of the United States, and said, look, you've got to do something about this. We've got to save the planet from DDT. And so Kennedy appointed a friend of his who was an environmental nincompoop to take charge of the Environment Protection Agency. Result, unfortunately, they banned DDT. This was copied worldwide because the left got going and said, aha, you know, we can show who's boss, we can ban DDT. And of course a lot of them were in league with people who were producing chemicals other than DDT, which they wanted to replace, so they were making money out of it. The usual unfortunate money power story and glory story. So they banned DDT. Now DDT is in fact safe enough, you can eat it by the tablespoonful. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do that. It won't hurt you if you do. It's completely harmless to humans, it's completely harmless to bird life and animals. The only thing it's harmful to is the Anopheles mosquito, which is the vector that carries the falciparum parasite that causes malaria, and to the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which carries the yellow fever parasite. It's fatal, and really fatal, to both of those. And the guy who invented it, who was German, got the Nobel Prize because before DDT was introduced, 1 million people a year around the world, nearly all of them children, were dying of malaria. It was one of the biggest killers. DDT came along and deaths from malaria fell to 50,000. We were on the point of wiping it out. When the left got in on the act, and it's exactly the same people, the Environmental Defense Fund, you know, people who've got hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, goodness knows where they get it from. Foreign governments, possibly. I don't know, I haven't looked, but it's certainly an alarming question. Are environmental movements being backed by China or India so that they won't have to compete with us for natural resources because we'll have shut our economies down? It's a question that the security services, I hope, are looking at, because it certainly worries me. But there was the Environmental Defense Fund. It came in and said, right, we're going to try and press for a ban on DDT. They succeeded. The number of deaths went back up from 50,000 a year to 1 million a year, and it stayed there for 40 years, while the likes of me were chirruping away saying, this is killing millions, it ought to be stopped, what on earth is the World Health Organization doing? And eventually, just 3 years ago, on the 15th of September 2006, Dr. Arata Kochi of the World Health Organization said, right, he said, in this field, politics usually predominates. Now we are going to take a stand on the science and the data. He ended the ban on DDT and declared that it would once again be the front line of defense against the mosquito.
40 million people died.
40 million children.
Because Jackie Kennedy read a silly book.
Yep.
And her foolish husband bought into it.
And then the entire international left came in on the act. And that was what did the damage. And so the problem is that you have this political faction which likes to show who's boss. That's the characteristic of the left. They are instinctive interventionists. And I know this is a little much of a political point, but it is unfortunately true that it was they who pushed the DDT ban. It was they who, to this day, will say that David Suzuki and others who advocated this ban, and David Suzuki to this day will tell you he regards this as one of the most successful campaigns he ever conducted. That killed 40 million people, nearly all of them children. And it took 40 years before this decision could be reversed. Why? Because we had to wait until all the people responsible for the original decision had either retired or died and were no longer in the way of doing the decent thing.
And because they thought it was harmful to people, to animals?
They didn't think any such thing. It was purely to show who was boss. There was, there was never any scientific case for this. And it's the same with global warming. There's no scientific case for this either. It's the same people trying to assert themselves in the same way, and this time they have succeeded yet again in getting the entire classe politique.
I wish we had another hour. Lord Christopher Monckton, thank you so very much indeed, really.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been a real pleasure and a real joy. And thank you so much for letting me sound off.
See, one thing that I've gotten off on lately is that basically, you know, I study fruit flies, and I suddenly realized that basically we're all fruit flies. Like, you know, you're born as an egg, and you live in that egg environment, and your parents kind of cut out all the external crap that comes in and protect you and nourish you and clothe you and all that. It's a very nice little egg, and it's comfortable. But at some point, you hatch out and start crawling around and eating stuff on your own. You start reading, you start looking at the tube, you start doing all sorts of things. You hatch out as a maggot. And a maggot can now crawl around. It's got 2 dimensions, and it can ingest food at its will, and it defecates all over the environment. And some other smaller maggots can even eat your defecation and get some nourishment out of it. And, you know, you grow as you eat more nourishment, and you molt. You become a second-level maggot. You know, a bigger maggot. It even looks different. And the bigger you get, the more people you can, or more maggots you can crush with your weight.
The world overrun with food.
Yeah, I mean, most people in the world are content to stay as first or second level maggots. And they establish their own little area, and they crawl around there, and that's fine. And the guys that become 10th level maggots are really big wheels.
Get a one world government.
I don't want to talk about all of it.
Yeah, we've got to have it, man. Yeah.
We've got a problem with one.
First section there is Charles Manson. This section is David Suzuki. This section is Christopher Monckton. Looks pretty calm. Ooh, Dave, you're getting a bit excited there. And then Charles Manson's way off the scale there.